Well, I see you have arrived. I admire your courage. And who am I? Just think of me as your very own personal ghost host. I'm here to tuck you in tonight. So, lock your windows and doors, look in your closet and under your bed, and hold your blankets tight, and prepare for 6 terrifyingly true ghost stories. Our first story tonight is from someone that saw a stranger cloaked in shadow in his home. We call this story, Stranger in the Hallway.
Since I was small, I have encountered different awkward situations that have no apparent explanations. For instance, I remember in one occasion where I was 5 years of age. I used to live in a 2-room apartment with my family and my grandfather. At that time, my father used to work early in the mornings, and my mother would wake up to prepare lunch. In one occasion, my father had to work even earlier than usual, so he woke up at around 3 in the morning. I still remember, my mother was in the kitchen when I woke up to the noise she was doing with the frying pan and the dishes she was using to prepare my father's lunch. I woke up and walked to the kitchen. My mother immediately spotted me and asked me what was I doing up, that it was too early for me, and told me to go back to bed. I told her I didn't want to, and I wanted to help her out. She smiled at me and said, "Okay." Yet she later said that I couldn't help because I had no shoes on, and to just sit down on the carpet. So I sat and waited. I just stared at my mother. As I was talking to my mother and asking her questions on what she was doing because it smelled good and I was getting hungry, I had this sudden feeling that someone was looking at me while I was sitting there on the carpet, close to the kitchen entrance. I turned my head to the living room, and everything was pitch black. This rush of cold air ran through my body, and I decided to just shake it off, and I turned back to see my mother. She was almost done, and I was glad. Then all of a sudden, I felt that same feeling as if someone was looking at me. I turned my head to see again, and saw nothing. Everything was dark. Then with the moonlight, I managed to catch a glimpse of something standing by the doorway to the hall that lead to the rooms and the bathroom. I was little, but I knew that wasn't normal. I just saw a shadow. No face, no color, just a black shadow. Now as I'm writing this, I still can see him clearly. It was the shape of a tall man. I could even distinguish the detail on his clothing, yet nothing had color. Everything was black. I rubbed my eyes to make sure I wasn't dreaming or just seeing stuff. Yet, when I opened them again, he was still there. I just stood there in shock and trying to figure out who he was. I assumed it was my father, yet I discontinued this idea for the reason that my dad was chunkier than this man. This figure standing in front of me was tall and slender. He seemed to have on some jeans and a t-shirt. As I was looking at him, my mother noticed me looking at something. She then asked me, "What are you doing, honey?" I just stood there, noticing this figure kneeling down to reach my height, yet he was still on the opposite side of me. I then responded to my mother that there was this man in the hallway. She was still putting the finishing touches to my father's lunch, so she didn't pay much attention. That dark figure was there, kneeling and staring straight at me. As I stood there looking at him, he started motioning to me to go to him. He stretched his right arm and with his finger signaled me to go to him. At this moment, I was somewhat afraid. It seemed that he was smiling. I couldn't really tell, for all of him was dark, but I had this feeling he was. I didn't move, and I just shouted back to my mother that this guy was telling me to go to him and that he was scaring me now. By this time, my mother said, "Who is staring at you, honey?" When I turned around to tell my mother and tell her that in the hallways someone was there, it must have been 1 minute or less. I looked back at the doorway, and no one was there. My mother also looked at the same time, and she was like, "Look, there is nothing there." She then turns on the lights and went to see who was there, for she assumed it was my older brother trying to play tricks on me. She went to the room, and my father was finishing getting dressed, and she asked him if he was in the hallway. He then told us that he wasn't. He was changing, and then she asked if my brother had left the room. Yet unaware of the situation, my dad responded with that my brother had been sleeping all this time. My mother seemed to have a worried face and then went to my grandfather's door to see if by any chance it had been him. His door was locked, and if he would have come out, we all would have heard the door. Well, it seemed my mother didn't have any reason for what had just happened and told me to cuddle in the bed with her and go to sleep. After that, everything was forgotten. But ever since that day, I have seen more shadows and heard weird noises. I am now 24, and until this day, I usually don't tell anyone on what I see or hear, because they would just brush me off saying, "There you go again with your ghost."
Well, I understand your grief. I mean, 3 a.m. is just too damn early to have to deal with a ghost. But you know what? You said your mom was cooking, so maybe the ghost just wanted to see what smelt so good. Next we have one about a ghost that likes playing with the lights. We call this tale, Haunted House in Maine.
Once, I lived in this house in a small town in Maine. It was an older house. I do not know any history behind it, and I most likely never will, but it was an older house. We had a basement and 4 rooms, the usual old house style. The kitchen is where most of the abnormal activities would take place. Our front door had an entrance, with another door, a heavy wooden door with a glass window. The way the door sat, you would have to push hard to open it, and then you would be in a small porch type which led to the front door. Quite often the front door would swing open, but yet the outside door would remain closed. You could sit in the living room and watch our kitchen light turn on and off. The kitchen light we had was old-fashioned. It had a fluorescent bulb with a metal pull string. Once you pulled the string, it came on. Well, my mom put a piece of yarn on to the metal string so us kids could reach it. You could actually watch that string being pulled. This happened every night, and we got used to it very quickly. I have always assumed that the presence was an old lady, and so did my family. We have no idea why, we just felt that. Us kids would go to bed with our windows open and blankets off, because in the middle of summer it gets hot. We would wake up, our windows closed, and bundled up in blankets. Now, we had talked to my parents about it often, and they said we were at that age, so they didn't even need to check on us. We were never frightened by any of this. It all became normal, even to our friends. But one day, and I will never forget any of this, my mom went to go turn on the kitchen light with the yarn on the end of it. She went to turn it on, and she was shocked so bad it dropped her to her knees. Now, I really am not sure, but I am almost positive that you cannot get electrocuted by yarn. A while after that, we moved. We just figured that she liked to play with us. It seemed like she liked to tease us.
Oh sure, some ghosts love to play with the lights. And why not? I mean, it's not like the ghost has to pay for the electric bill or anything. Next we have one from a woman that when she was a child she had an imaginary friend. Or was she imaginary? It's a tale simply entitled, An Imaginary Friend.
When I was a little girl, I had an imaginary friend, like most little kids do. I called her Gina. We would play together and such. My mother never thought anything about it, as her friends' children had them too. But as I got into kindergarten and started getting more friends, I decided I didn't need her anymore. I remember telling her to leave, but she wouldn't. I would get so upset and tell my mother. My mom told me to tell her to leave, and if she wouldn't, she would come up herself and tell her to leave. I went upstairs to tell her. I don't remember what I said exactly, but I knew she didn't leave. My mom came upstairs and told her to leave, but I told her she didn't. My mom just tucked me into bed and told me we would do it again tomorrow. She bugged me the whole night, keeping me up. I was so angry. Finally, after I ignored her, she left. I was very happy and relieved. When I turned 18, I flew over to England to see my grandmother and other family. I was looking through one of my aunt's old family albums and came across this picture of this little girl. She looked familiar, like I had seen her before. I asked my aunt who she was, and she told me it was her cousin, who had died at the age of only 8. I asked for her name, and she said Eugenia. I was startled. I told her of the imaginary friend I had and how I called her Gina. My family is very spiritual. and she said it was probably her cousin visiting with me. When I returned to the States, I told my sister. I didn't live with her when I was little because she lived with her father. She said she had one and she called her Gigi. I also told my cousin, and she had one, who she called You. We believe it was the same little girl who just wanted to meet us and play with us. We don't think of it as a bad thing when we think back. We realize it was a family member who just wanted to meet us.
Wow, Gina really got around, didn't she? Anyway, on to our next story. It's about a group in India who's being harassed by a ghost. It's called The Old Man in the House.
I live and work in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. But this took place in Goa, India, where I went down for a vacation with my 2 daughters, my younger sister and her boyfriend. It was July 2006, when we have the rainy season in India. We left from Mumbai at 5:30 a.m. in the morning, and by the time we reached Goa, it was about 4 p.m. We were to live in my sister's boyfriend's newly purchased house, which they used for vacation purposes only, which meant the house stood empty most of the time. After much cleaning of the house, we went to a nearby restaurant for dinner. By the time we got home, we were all so exhausted from the traveling and cleaning that everybody fell asleep as soon as they put their heads on the pillow. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by someone stroking my hair. I got up and looked at my sister and her boyfriend, because he was naughty and always up to mischief, but they both were fast asleep. I laid down again and tried to close my eyes, and again I felt someone touch my head, in a very loving manner. I freaked out and slept, or stayed awake, the remainder of the night near my sister and her boyfriend's feet. The next afternoon I told my sister and her boyfriend about this, and she told me that she felt a presence in the bathroom when she was bathing. It was as if someone was watching her. This watch-over feeling was very strong in the kitchen and bathroom. I never felt threatened by it, but I did not like the being watched over feeling, especially in the bathroom. My sister's boyfriend got really freaked and would not go to the toilet or bathroom without my sister. We stayed there for 4 nights, but I never slept even for 1 night. The last night we were there, I actually saw a shadow peering at us from the kitchen. Maybe it was just saying goodbye. My sister and I always felt this entity was a male, and an old one too.
Wow, this ghost sounds a bit on the pervy side. I mean, first he's stroking your head as you sleep, then he's watching you in the john. If he was still alive, I bet he'd be on a registry somewhere. Next, we have one about a haunted school. It's a little ditty we call the No Class Ghost.
I attended a school back in 2013-2014 that was so haunted, I still don't believe it. Me and many other students, but also some of the teachers working there, saw things go flying in the air, heard footsteps, were sometimes touched by something we couldn't see, and had various new and expensive equipment. Myself, I had an iPhone 5 and a fully spec'd late 2012 iMac at the time. Fail whenever the ghost entered the room we were in, and so on. The various tech problems all disappeared as soon as I left the school and took my stuff back home with me, by the way. The iMac is still in use today by my uncle, and he experiences no issues with it to this date. So to my first serious experience at the school. One night, I was alone with a girl at my student house. Everyone else was partying down at the school building, when suddenly we started hearing footsteps from the attic upstairs. It was a tiny room up there that was only big enough for storing some tour and hiking equipment, like a few backpacks and such. After maybe half a minute or so, the footsteps started coming down the stairs from the attic. At this point, me and my friend went dead silent, and we were both just staring towards the door that went to the attic. The footsteps came all the way down and went into the living room where we were sitting. At this point, the sound of the footsteps switched from sounding like someone walking around in big boots into what to me sounded more like someone coming wet and barefoot out of the shower. When the sound got to the middle of the room, which was right in front of where me and this girl were sitting, it stopped, and for a few brief moments, there was nothing but dead silence. The girl and I just looked at each other for like 5 to 10 seconds before my eyes caught something going on behind the girl's back. We were sitting on a couch together, and behind her were these huge windows that went from the floor and all the way up to the ceiling. They had some seriously huge blinds as well. And so I watched this pretty heavy lead thing that certain industrial blinds have be lifted all the way up from the floor to just above the middle of the window. There it kept floating in the air for about 5 seconds before it was punched into the window with such force that I'm sure the window would have broke if it hadn't been for those thick blinds protecting it. The girl didn't see this as it happened behind her back, but you can be sure that she heard the noise. In fact, she got so scared that she literally jumped into my lap screaming. That's the moment when I stopped trying to give possible, natural explanations to everything paranormal.
Well, maybe the ghost just wasn't a fan of Apple products. He or she could have been more into Microsoft Windows and Android phones. You know, people always come up to me and ask, "Ghost dude, when did you first start liking Ghost? Was it when you first became one, or was it before?" Well, to tell the truth, I've always have had an interest in Ghost. And as with most people, my interest started with my first very own experience, which happened way before my passing. I call this one my origin story. My story begins in the early part of the 1970s. I was but a baby, not quite a toddler. We had just bought a house in a small town in southern Ontario, Canada. It's the house I grew up in and where my father resides to this day. It was me, my mom and dad, and my brother and sister. My dad was able to get a job at a local factory doing shift work. When it comes to the story, he was working afternoons. The house was a bit of a fixer-upper, but we had the upstairs set up for my brother, sister, and me as like temporary bedrooms. During those early days, we spent most of our time during the evenings in the basement because that is where the TV was. Anyway, my mom, brother, sister, and me were all in the basement watching TV when we heard the kitchen door open, then shut. Then we heard a series of footsteps going across the kitchen and come to a stop when it got to the stairway that led up to mine and my siblings' bedrooms. Then the footsteps reversed course and walked back to the kitchen door. We heard it open and close again. It would repeat every night. Sometimes it would exit back through the kitchen door, or sometimes through the front door. We told my dad what had been happening, which of course he thought we were completely nuts. That is until he was home, and he heard and experienced the same things we have. When we would hear the footsteps, my dad and brother would go barreling up the stairs, and poof, the footsteps would stop for the night. He even tried to put flour on the kitchen floor, which of course cheesed off my mom a bit, but it didn't work either. Well, as time went on, so did life. Our visitor would come for his nightly visits. We grew to think of him as a friend. He didn't do anything bad. Anyway, my dad continued the renovations of the house, and eventually he and my mom discussed the stairs leading to my brothers and sisters and my bedrooms. Well, they never liked them. They weren't even convinced that they were particularly safe, so they decided not only to fix them, but to move them as well. And that is exactly what they did. Once that particular job was done, we, still hanging out in the basement at the time, heard the kitchen door open, then shut. We heard the footsteps go across the kitchen to where the stairs had been, stop for a moment, then continue walking to the location the stairs are now. There he stopped, and poof, no more footsteps, not leaving through a door, nothing. Well, sometime later, my folks were talking to a neighbor who had been living on that street since before it was a street. She said that she remembered when they were building our house that while working on the stairs that lead to the bedrooms, a worker had fallen down the stairs and passed. So what we came to believe is that he was returning to warn us about the stairs in hopes of preventing what happened to him from happening to us. And for that, I want to say thank you. You probably saved our lives. So, there you have it, my very own origin story. I should see about looking up that construction worker, just so I can shake his hand. That was some scary stuff tonight, wasn't it? But do you know what is not scary? Hitting like, subscribe, and sharing this video. it'll really help us keep the ghosts at bay. And of course, if any of you have a story to share, then by all means, drop me a line in the comments. But I do want to thank you for stopping by, and I hope the stories we told won't be giving you too many bad dreams. But if they do, then maybe you shouldn't run from them. After all, sometimes it's better to embrace your nightmares